Welcome to the session Data Security and Privacy. In today's world, when data is being discovered by multiple business organizations in their activities of business processes, it is one of the greatest challenge for these organizations to secure, protect the data what they have been generating from the business activities. Now, who owns the responsibility of this data protection? Welcome to today's session about data security and privacy. In today's session, we are going to discuss about introduction to data security and privacy, definitions and importance. We are also going to discuss about data protection, differences between data security and data privacy, principles and concepts. We are going to use a model called as CIA Triad to understand how data could be secured with the help of this module, what measures could be implemented, data privacy laws and regulations, different regulations from different parts of the world, and then we are going to talk about data protection with emerging technologies. To start with, let us understand the data generated by the organizations in their day-to-day activities varies from one sector to another sector. In simple words, the data generated in a healthcare sector is different from the data generated in bank or in an education institution or in an e-commerce industry or a retail outlet. Now, the data generated in e-governance, like as citizens when we transact or interact with government, the data generated is totally different. Now, should there be a same measure for protecting the data which is generated from different departments like healthcare, bank, education department, governance, retail outlets? Obviously not. Now, the data generated in a healthcare management requires high amount of confidentiality. Now, the data which is handled in their day-to-day activities in a banking sector requires a different treatment of high security measures. In case of education department or a retail outlet or e-commerce transactions where the customers trust and hand their data to the organization, it requires a different kind of security levels, and the organizations need to ensure they maintain a legality or compliance of not misusing the data what has been surrendered to them by the customers or by their clients in the process of business. Now, there is where data privacy plays an important role. So, when we talk about data protection, it encompasses both data security as well as data privacy. Now, let us formally understand these definitions and then try to understand the differences. Data security is the practice of protecting digital information from unauthorized access, corruption, or theft throughout its entire life cycle. Now, how could an organization take measures to protect the data? Now, there are multiple ways a data can have threat. Some years ago, there's a saying, there was a big, bank theft happening in America, and the bank robber always told, there's where the money is, and that's how you would always look at banks to make a robbery. Today, the organizations have a situation like that where the data is a huge asset to the organizations. And this attracts a lot of people who could mistreat the data or try to hack the system. So it becomes the responsibility of an organization to create a secure ecosystem to protect the data from internal and external users who intentionally or unintentionally try to break the data secure system. Now, when we talk about data security, it is also important to understand the threat need not be only about accessing unauthorized data, deleting or misusing. It could also be something like natural calamities or disasters through which an organization might lose the data. So, what is the plan of resilience or data backup by the organization? Imagine some of the organizations who handle huge data like banks, government sectors. How would they protect this data if they do not have a resilience policy? So, organizations also need to have data resilience or backup plan as one of their major concern in data security. Now, having understood a bit about data security, let's move on to data privacy. Now, while we talked about data security, we were talking about both internal and external threats. Data privacy, simply known as information privacy, refers to the rights of individuals to control how their personal information is collected, used, shared, and stored. Further, how the requirements levied on organization like commercial companies, how they obtain and use data according to the regulatory guidelines. Now, when we were talking about data security, we were having concern about how to secure the data. In terms of data privacy, it becomes the organization's responsibility to handle the data what they have got in a very careful manner. Now, the data definitely is touched by various stakeholders like your employees, vendors, or any other business stakeholders who are connected. In terms of governance, probably the data is moving through different set of people who might have access to the data. In the process of handling the data, how do people look at that data if it is having high value or confidentiality? Now, there is where the concern for data privacy comes into the picture. Let us say we as customers give our data to e-commerce outlets or healthcare sectors. Now, once our transaction is over with the organization, what do they do with that data? Now, do they keep the data or do they have a policy where once the data is no more required, do they delete it or securely put it in some place which is not accessible by anybody else? Now, data privacy is all about creating measures or giving privacy to the data what has been generated, collected and processed during business activities. Now, if nobody raises a concern, organizations would be happily handling the data the way they wanted. But there is something called as legal compliance. Now, data protection lays down a set of measures, laws or policies either by government or by the organizations themselves to handle this data in a secured manner. Now, to understand what is the relationship between data security and data privacy, let's take the help of this diagram. If you see, data security and data privacy put together is what data protection is all about. On the left side, we have set of things listed associated with data security, while on the right side, data privacy lists certain set of things. Now, data protection is all about set of guidelines an organization lays down by itself at the first level. So, security is all about how these policies are getting enforced. Now, privacy is all about how or where the data is generated, what is the importance of data and why. Now, put together, the organization needs to understand where it needs to design data security measures and data privacy guidelines. Now, unless they tell the employees what is the importance of data, like how confidential it is or the level of confidentiality, very highly confidential, like let us take an example of healthcare sector where the data needs to be looked in by the respective handling doctor only and not by others who are touching the files. Maybe in a banking sector, the data needs to be handled only by the account holder. Now, in such cases, we can take the help of a model called as CIA model, which helps us in understanding how data protection can be enabled. Now, to understand more about data protection, let us also try to understand the difference between data privacy and data security. Data security is all about protecting data from unauthorized access, while data privacy is ensuring proper handling of personal data which belongs to somebody. Now, if we look into this table, we clearly understand how the objectives, key concerns, regulatory framework, the measures and the compliance differ between data security and data privacy. The purpose of data security is to safeguard the data confidentiality, integrity and availability, while the very purpose of data privacy is to ensure ethical and lawful handling of personal data. Now, data security is more concerned about protecting the data, while data privacy is more concerned about transparency, and purpose of limiting the data access. Now, when we look at the key concerns of data security, it is focusing more on encryption, access controls, and threat prevention. While in data privacy, it is more about the data owner side, like it's about consent, transparency, and the purpose limitation. Now, similarly, when we talk about the regulatory framework, in terms of data security, it is all about the security standards like ISO and NIST. When it comes to data privacy, it is more about privacy laws, and every country has a different set of privacy laws like data privacy, data protection laws, which we are going to discuss after this differences. Again, when we talk about the stakeholders, data security is concerned with IT security teams, cyber security professionals. Now, data privacy is all about the individual owners, like the people's data, individuals' data, data belonging to group of department or officers. So it is at a micro level compared to the large organizational data level. Now, further, when we talk about compliance for data security, we have security audits and testing methods. While for data privacy, we have consent management, data protection, impact statements, and authorities enforcement. Now, having understood the differences between the data security and data privacy, let us understand more about data protection. Data protection is the practice of safeguarding sensitive information from loss, damage, or corruption. It also includes making sure that data is accessible to users. Now, let us try to understand more about data protection. Now, why is it so important to protect the data, be it in terms of data security or data privacy? When we talk about data security, organizations take initial measures due to the legal compliance or something like they have to protect the information which is quite sensitive. Sometimes if it is like confidential, it might be related to payment details or healthcare confidential data details or governance where individual citizens data needs to be secured from the point of non-disclosure. While the other reason why multiple organizations want to protect the data is to maintain the trust. In the process of business activities, the business customers, clients hand over their data to the organizations. So it becomes the responsibility of the organization to ensure the data handed over to them or which is in their jurisdiction is handled carefully. So this builds trust between the business organizations and the clients or customers. Once the data is protected, it can save their expenses. The organizations can rely on their old data to look into the historical data and make predictions about their future decisions. From this point, rather than collecting the new data, organizations can always store the old data, but they also need to comply with the norm, like once the data is not required, if the data owner is not consenting, that needs to go through something called as data erasure or erasing of data. The data should be permanently deleted by the organization. While most of the organizations today are entitled to do so, there are no particular law which is guiding to confirm that the data has been deleted. Above all, one of the major important reason why data security is established is to gain competitive advantage. Like every asset, organizations also consider data as one of the major digital asset and they try to own it for the purpose of competitive advantage. Now, more about data privacy. Now, when we look at why data privacy is important, the first and foremost reason is it is one of the human rights. So, it ensures that people's personal information is handled in accordance with the law of that particular nation or international norm. It also prevents the misuse, like the personal data being used to defraud or harass people. Then again, it protects against unwanted marketing. Now, this depends country to country. Companies use personal data to promote their products without the consent of consumers. Now, this might lead to digital harassment or kind of mental disturbance to the customers. The last important reason for protecting the data privacy is to secure freedom of expression. It prevents governments from tracking and monitoring people's activities. Just because the government is governing citizens, it doesn't mean it owns the data. Even the government needs to respect the data privacy of its citizens. From this point, whatever the law or the compliance says, even the governments need to obey and follow the orders. When it comes to data protection, organizations, individuals, or governments, each of them are supposed to abide by the norms. Now, moving on to the next topic, how do we secure the data protection? One particular dimension is telling people and assuming they are going to follow that. The second thing is using law or enforcement through a compliance or a statutory method. Now, both the methods are used in organizations and by governments. We have CIA Triad, a method which comprises of confidentiality, integrity and availability to ensure that people would manage the data in a responsible way. So, the principles and concepts of confidentiality, integrity and availability are represented in this diagram. Confidentiality states the level of confidentiality of the data, very high confidentiality, low confidentiality or moderate. Now, whether it is high or low confidentiality, the person who is getting the access to the data needs to understand how it needs to be treated, and it is on the onus or responsibility of the individual who is having access to the data, and that part falls on the principle of integrity. So, we see here confidentiality and integrity play a key role, and availability is something which organizations have to ensure through policies and measures, like allowing the role of access, like accessibility or authentication to the respective user for the data. So, how does CIA Triad help maintain security? Confidentiality prevents unauthorized access to information, integrity ensures the data is not tampered with, and availability ensures the information is available when needed. Now, to achieve this, organizations might use encryption or cryptography as a tool. How can CIA Triad be used? It could be used to identify vulnerabilities and develop solutions, to manage the security of products and data, to evaluate an organization's security, to help organizations upgrade and maintain security, to guide security teams in addressing concerns, to inform areas like security framework implementation and cyber threat intelligence. Now, this could be achieved through digital signatures, validation and authentication. CIA can be achieved through simple digital signatures or through data validation and authentication. Now, how do organizations achieve data security and privacy? If you look at the points here, it's very clear. It is possible through physical security of hardware and storage devices, encryption and cryptography, like using digital signatures, validations and authentications, use of cryptography where the data, actual data is hidden from the possibility of the data being visible to anybody who comes at the first layer of data access. Set administrative and access controls, logical security of software applications like providing authentications, password management, access rule controls. Organizational policies and procedures like security policies and governance to be laid down by the organization, developing, implementing and enforcing data security policies, and this needs to be communicated to the employees through code of conduct or certain measures where each and every employee who is coming across the data or the customer who is handling the data is aware about the data dimensions. Best practices for corporate governance in data security. Some of the countries do have legalities which have been formed and enacted so that the organizations strictly follow the norms. Identity and access management, where user authentication, authorization and accountability are laid down. There is also something called as MFA, multi-factor authentication, and RBAC, like role-based access control, which enables right amount of information to be accessed to the right set of people. Now, having understood all the differences between the data security and privacy and a simple CIA triad and why it is important and how it could be achieved, let us try to look at the law enforcement and the ways it is endorsed. Now, when we look at data security, there are multiple types or ways through which data can be secured. Few of the data security types are through encryption, data erasure, data masking and data resiliency. Now, this simply means like data encryption is setting up highest data conversion methods so that it is not easily decrypted or read by the users who are accessing the information. Data erasure is deleting the data once it is not required. Data resilience is to provide backup for the data which has been created, and data masking is creating security layers to protect the data. Now, different countries have different types of law and regulations for protecting the data. Data privacy laws and regulations vary from country to country, internationally, nationally and regionally. Now, let us look into few of the international regulations which are strong and very nicely managed by these countries or by certain regulations. In India, we have Digital Personal Data Protection DPDP Act 2023, which is the first data protection law. Like in India, it is the first data protection law. Until few years, we were following the European Union's GDPR, that is General Data Protection Regulatory Act. Now, the Indian law has been designed and implemented according to the needs of business and individual data protection requirements. Let us take a look at the data protection rights. Right to be informed, right of access, right to rectification, right to erasure, right to restriction of processing, right to data portability and right to object. Now, whenever a data is generated, the data needs to be protected under these rights. The DPDP Act applies to data collected online or offline or later digitized. Now, in Europe, we have GDPR, that is General Data Protection Regulation. We have the California Consumer Protection Act, that is CCPA, which gives consumers more control over the personal information that has been collected during the business process activity. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, protecting public company shareholders from accounting errors and financial fraud. There is also HIPAA, HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, protecting the electronic health records which has been collected in the process of healthcare management. We have multiple regulations which have been laid down by different countries. With the emerging technologies, there has been enormous amount of data which is generated at a great speed. Organizations have challenge in managing the data, particularly when it comes to securing, monitoring and measuring. They do have internal audit systems for data management. Now, apart from that, they are also using certain technologies like cloud computing, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, machine learning, where data is being accessed, used or churned through multiple dimensions. Now, from this point, it becomes very, very important for organizations to lay down policies, governing concerns or set of practices when data has been generated, handled, processed and transferred, or finally to take a call on when it needs to be deleted. Apart from what we discussed, it is also important for organizations to have data breach management and response. So, we have strategies for detecting, reporting and managing data breaches, like when an employee, organization or individual, when they particularly breach or misuse the data, what should be the measures taken immediately. It is to protect the data as well as punish and ensure the data is handled in the right way. Now, with business going at great speed, we have been repeatedly understanding data generation is also occurring at great speed. This brings multiple challenges, and there are always technologies designed to handle this data securely to ensure the data protection. Let us take a quick recap of today's session highlights. We discussed about data security and privacy, definitions, importance, difference between data security and privacy. We also discussed more about data protection, principles and concepts with the help of CIA Triad, data privacy laws and regulations, and we concluded with data protection with emerging technologies. Now let us take a look at some interesting facts. Few references used in this section. Most of these references have been taken from the Indian government website, organizations, authenticated websites, because it is dealing with data security regulation norms. Thank you.